thank you for all my comments. Yay! It's lovely to have more subscribers, to know that I'm getting out there and helping people, that you're interested. Anyway, shadows this week. Let's get into it. Carrying on from our 3 little pots last week, using the same technique, so it's a good one to continue on with, is actually learning how to add shadows, because that's the final part of making something like a little pot or a little plant fit into its surroundings. So I'm just drawing up a nice big heavy pot here, and I'm going to put a little bit of landscaping in it, some flowering plant, and then a great big trunk coming out of it. Now, knowing that the shadow, the sun's coming from over here, you can actually imagine that it's going to be casting a shadow this way. So I'm going to extend this a little bit. The shadow's going to go in here, and it actually, where it hits the wall, it has to come up and meet the pot. So there's going to be a shape like that. And then this is closer to the wall. So that in itself is going to be a different shape shadow. You'll see it more clearly when I add colour. Make sure that the light foliage is on the top right side, which is where the sun's coming from, and then as you go towards the left and as you go down, the foliage gets darker. Now for the shadows. So first of all, we need what we've painted already to be dry, and here I'm just adding water from my brush onto the page. I'm going to follow down the length of the trunk and try and keep that really clean edged, but here I'm going to soften it out a bit, so I actually want the paper to be wet further out than what I think I'll add colour. With the shadow shape, it's actually quite a complex thing that you just have to use your at this stage, as a beginner, I would just be using my observation of shadows and not worrying too much about the technical information to draw shadows, because it is a whole subject on its own. So here I've added our typical shadow colour, which is the ultramarine with a little bit of burnt sienna added. It gives it that coolness so that it really looks like there's no heat or sunshine getting in there. I'm going to make it darker here because this is the most intense shadow area where the plant is actually attached to the wall or really touching the wall. So that part can always be really, really dark. Then as I come out, where I'm actually doing the shadow of the foliage that's further off the wall, that becomes softer and lighter. Remember to make some depth in your colour as well, because when you add water to the paper and as it dries it does lighten. Don't be afraid, and if you do make it too dark, remember it's watercolor, so you can go back over it even 2 days or 4 days later, wet it carefully with a clean wet brush and get some paper towel or tissue and lift the color out. For the trunk, I'm just going straight over the area that I wet with the same color, and I do want more of a firm edge here, so I'm not really having that paper too wet outside of where I did my first drawing. I'm adding a little bit here and there on this side because obviously that would be casting a shadow as well. So where the trunk or the plant is closest to the wall, I've used a much sharper line and darker colour. And then as it's casting the shadow of the foliage that's further out from the wall, that gets softer, so it gets blurrier and it gets lighter. Now I'll quickly paint the pot in. I'll speed this bit up a bit in the video, just so I can get on with the shadow for the pot. I'm choosing to wet some of this on the shady side, because where that meets the shadow, I don't want it to be sharp edged. But elsewhere, I'm going to leave the paper pretty dry, just putting little dabs of water here and there. Now, see that I'm getting a similar mark with my brush, so a good thing to do is hold your brush really vertically, and I can see there's like a little lip on the edge of the bristles here. So what I should be doing is rotating my brush with my thumb and my pointing finger, because that will ensure that the marks I'm making are very random. The paper here is still damp, and that's why it's a little bit softer. I really do want the shadow to feel like it's connected to the pot, so I'm actually going to run my wet brush right up to the very edge of the pot and then out. So that's that wet on dry paper. Wet on dry, remember, is really good for a very sharp or specific edge to your artwork. So you can see I've tinted the page a little bit there. That's because of the watercolor pencil that I use, the purpley blue. And now it's time to fill in that color with the same colors that I used before, which here on this palette is my French ultramarine blue and a little bit of burnt sienna. I don't need a huge amount, and I'm going to start really close to my pot. You can see even as I put it down how strong that line is. Nothing's going to rip through that barrier, the border, and run into the pot area. I'm adding direct burnt sienna here because I want to show that the heat of the day is literally pulling some of that glow of the orangey pot out of the pot itself and onto the surrounding area, which means I can even go to an orange and throw some of that down. And then I can just go with a clean brush just full of water and try to keep it all in one smooth line like that. But then I can actually drag it out around the edge. And then I'm not dabbing the page, I'm rubbing the page. So I was keeping my brush onto the paper the whole time. And then here, as I go further away from the terracotta pot, I'm getting more of my French ultramarine blue involved. Where it's close to the plant, this is wet on dry, the page is dry now, so I'm getting really specific shapes. But then as I get further away, I need to wet that paper just a little bit. And you can see that what was there sharp is now very soft, and also the rule of strong to faded. It's probably a good time to show you how you can take the colour out. So once that is dry, which it is, now I'm just wiping I'm wiping my brush on this towel, press down and wipe it out. The key is actually laying it flat like this and dragging it with some weight. You're really pressing down quite a bit on the paper. And then I'll come in and press heavily with some tissue, and you can see that colour's noticeably lighter now. I'm just going to intensify that area to pull it away from the wall a little bit more, and also at the base I want to create the idea that it's much more intense right near the pot, but then as I go out here, it's not so intense. And also by doing this, I've given it a flat line and then a vertical line. So what I might do literally is to increase the idea of that, is to wash a little bit more colour onto the ground. Have that pot sitting down, so I'm going to put a really soft little shadow all the way around. Emphasise the bottom of that wall with some random little marks. And there you have a nice artistic shadow. Thank you so much for watching, and let's be creative. See you next week.